So, if we're going to be talking about trauma, we pretty much have to talk about stress. So, in this video, we're going to talk about some of the physiological uh, parts of the system that influence stress. The next one, we'll talk about how this leads to disease. So, there are a number of things that we're going to be talking about here. HPA axis, hypothalamic pituitary adrenal axis, directs the adrenals, which are on top of the kidneys, to make cortisol, which are long-lasting, long-acting hormones. There's also this sympatho-adrenomedullary axis at the SAM, which initiates production in adrenals and the brain of noradrenaline and adrenaline. So these are short-acting neurotransmitters. Hormones bathe the system for long periods of time. Neurotransmitters generally we're talking about in the brain, generally very quick. The amygdala is part of the limbic system in the brain. It's the alarm center. It says, and involved with emotions, triggers, fight, flight. The prefrontal cortex right up here regulates cognitive and executive function, helps us to make decisions about what it is that we're going to do. The hippocampus helps us to process emotions and seems to be really essential for memory consolidation. And the locus coeruleus is involved in various kinds of processes, including sleep-wake cycles, attention, responses to stress, memory formation, retrieval. It, modulates blood flow, metabolism, oxygen and glucose throughout the brain. So the autonomic nervous system, so those are the players. Let's talk more about specific ones. The autonomic nervous system is comprised of two branches. The sympathetic revs us up and prepares us to deal with a stressor. So our pupils dilate and they dry. We get goosebumps, our mouth dries, our hands get sweaty. We breathe faster and more shallowly. Our heart rate increases. Our blood supplies as much as it can to the muscles, so our blood pressure goes up. Our adrenal is more active, digestion inhibited, and often there are problems in terms of sexual functioning. With the parasympathetic nervous system, the pupils constrict. They're moist. We focus on near vision. No goosebumps. We tend to salivate. Our palms are dry. Our passages are constricted. Heart rate is lower. Blood pressure is lower. Adrenal glands are less active, and we're able to eat or to digest our food. And part of what, this is, think about the sympathetic nervous system is preparing us to deal with the stressor, and the parasympathetic nervous system slows us down and deals with other parts of the system. So stress does a number of different things. Short term, we're worried and unable to turn it off. Our heart beats faster. Our breathing quickens, sending more oxygen around the body. We have more digestive problems. Our skin becomes more sensitive and oily. We're having more sexual problems. muscles tense up as if they're preparing to make a run. Long term, we're going to have more headaches, more mental health problems, more heart problems, more problems in terms of the respiratory system, skin and hair conditions. We're running into problems. We're more likely to run into problems with type 2 diabetes, and we're more likely to run into fertility issues. So there are two different branches. We talked about this earlier, the HPA, hypothalamic pituitary adrenal axis, and the SAM, the or adrenal medullary system. And each of these are involved with stress or activated by stress in different ways. So when we're looking at the SAM network, we're talking about the, stress activates the hypothalamus in the brain. So right here, which activates the sympathetic nervous system that gets us aroused, activates the adrenal medulla, which is right on top of the kidneys, and causes a release of adrenaline and noradrenaline. So these are contributing to the stress response, increasing heart rate, increasing blood pressure. The HPA axis, again, stress leads or goes to the hypothalamus, is processed there, and causes changes in the pituitary in terms of, and then causes release of ACTH, and when the adrenal cortex detects this, it releases corticosteroids, which increase blood sugar level, and makes fats available for energy. Now, stress isn't a bad thing. So mild amounts of stress actually are pretty good for us. We certainly want some stress as we're preparing for exams, when we're preparing for a job interview, etc. Short term, we can have more stress, and that's particularly okay if it's buffered by supportive relationships. But when that stress is long-term and severe, and we don't have enough supportive relationships or good coping, then it tends to become toxic. So we're looking for a good balance here. So during chronic stress, what we're seeing is the amygdala becomes overactive and sends an exaggerated response. So rather than going, whoa, problem, it goes problem, 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 inhibiting the prefrontal cortex. So one of the things that you may have noticed is it's more difficult to make decisions when you're stressed. And that's because the prefrontal cortex is downregulated. And so we tend to behave impulsively. We have difficulty concentrating, difficulty solving problems. The hippocampus is disrupted, and so we have difficulty storing memories. The locus coeruleus becomes dysregulated, floods the brain with noradrenaline. We become more anxious, aroused, aggressive, and we may have more difficulty with sleep. The ventral tegmental area decreases sensitivity to dopamine, increases craving for pleasure, increases risky behavior. And the immune system is disrupted by the endocrine response to stress. And we are at risk of poor immune responses to infections, problems with wound recovery, and reduced immunity conferred from vaccinations. So one of the problems is that for some people, their stress response is sensitized, that even relatively milder amounts of stress produce disproportional or a disproportionate response. Some people, it's more typical, more proportional to the stressor. And other people tend to be much more resilient to stress, so that they are not, their system isn't whacked, out of alignment by stress. What we want is either the neurotypical response or more resilient response. So chronic stress influences our response to stress. So, if we are here and we've experienced a lot of stress, a lot of unpredictable, extreme, prolonged stress, we tend to get sensitized to it, and we are more like the top line in the last video or last slide. So this right here. On the other hand, if we are responding in a more predictable, or if our stress is more predictable, moderate, controllable, then we are much more likely to respond in a resilient way, like this. And with that, I'm going to say goodbye, and I'll see you in the next video as we talk about the relationship between stress and disease. Take care. Bye-bye.